Quit telling a stupid story about the stupid desert and die already. Who can forget Elaine's immortal words from Seinfeld, bravely trash-talking the 1996 Anthony Minghella film and Oscar darling The English Patient. In the film, and the 1992 Michael Ondaatje novel, it was adapted from, a Canadian army nurse in the closing days of the Second World War finds herself in an abandoned Italian villa caring for the titular English patient. Horribly burnt in a plane crash in the North African desert, he appears to have forgotten his name and identity, but begins to recount epic stories of exploring the desert in the 1930s and embarking on a doomed romance with the wife of a jealous British explorer. Slowly, Hannah and the other characters inhabiting the villa piece together that the patient is not in fact English, but a Hungarian named László Almásy who collaborated with the Germans during the war. While the main narrative of the English patient is fictional, László Almásy was a real person who did indeed explore the Libyan desert in the 1930s and assist the Germans with spy missions during the Second World War. However, Ondaatje takes many creative liberties with Almásy's life, making it simultaneously more and less interesting than it actually was, and today we're going to tell you the real story of the English patients. László Adolf Ede Georgi Maria Almásy de Zadani et oh my Toro Torokzen Miklos. From now on, let's just call him László, alright? Was born on August the 22nd, 1895, in Borostianko in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, today Bernstein in Austria, the son of renowned Hungarian zoologist and ethnographer Georgi Almásy and Princess Maria Esterházy de Galnatha. Though born into Hungarian nobility on his mother's side, László Almásy bore no official title. Nonetheless, he enjoyed a privileged upbringing in the family's hereditary castle in Bernstein, where early on he showed an interest in aviation, even attempting unsuccessfully to build and fly his own glider. Like many children of noble families at the time, Almásy was sent away to receive an English education, studying from 1911 to 1914 at Barrow School in Eastbourne, Sussex. In Ondaatje's novel, the fictional Almásy is described as speaking with an English rather than a Hungarian accent, hence why the other characters initially mistake him for an Englishman. On the outbreak of the First World War in August 1914, Almásy and his brother János joined the 11th Hussars, seeing action against the Serbs and later the Russians on the Eastern Front. In 1916, he transferred to the Austro-Hungarian Imperial and Royal Aviation Troops, becoming a fighter pilot. He served until March 1918, when he was shot down over northern Italy, whereupon he was reassigned as a flight instructor for the remainder of the war. Though played by Ralph Fiennes in the film, the real-life Almásy bore only a passing resemblance to the famous actor. A later British intelligence file describing him as very ugly and shabbily dressed, with drooping shoulders and a fat and pendulous nose. Ouch. After the war, Almásy returned to England to study at the Eastbourne Technical School, spending much of his spare time at the nearby Eastbourne Flying Club. In 1921, he returned to Hungary, where he became the personal secretary to János Mix, the Bishop of Szombathely and a leading figure in the post-war movement to restore the Habsburg dynasty to the throne. Following the First World War, Hungary briefly became a communist state known as the Hungarian Democratic Republic. However, in 1920, a right-wing counter-revolution overthrew the communist government and installed Sándor Simonyi Szemandám as Prime Minister and Admiral Miklos Horthy as Regent. Almásy, a lifelong monarchist, drove Bishop Mikes and King Karl IV of Hungary, great-nephew of deceased Emperor Franz Joseph I, into Budapest as part of the Habsburg restoration attempt, but they were promptly turned away and exiled back to Austria. Throughout the attempted coup, the king referred to László as Count Almásy, mistaking him for another branch of the family. Almásy would later use this presumed, if illegitimate, title to his advantage, especially when trying to curry favour with Egyptian royalty. Following this brief foray into Hungarian politics, Almásy next became a driver and representative for the Austrian car manufacturer Steyr, entering and winning several auto races on behalf of the company. In 1926, in order to demonstrate the sturdiness of Steyr cars in rugged conditions, he and Prince Antal Esterházy embarked on an epic road trip and hunting exhibition along the Daral River from Alexandria in Egypt to Khartoum and the Dinda River in Sudan, the first time this journey had been accomplished in an ordinary automobile. This expedition had a profound impact on Almásy, who soon became obsessed with exploring the vast and uncharted Libyan desert. Over the next several years, he returned to the area frequently, guiding wealthy Europeans on safaris along the Nile. In 1929, he led an expedition through Egypt, Sudan, and Kenya in a pair of Steyr XX trucks, a 12,000-kilometer journey captured by Austrian filmmaker Rudi Meyer in a documentary titled Durch Afrika mit Automobil, or Through Africa by Car. In 1931, Almásy attempted to launch the first aerial exploration of the Libyan desert. Along with Count Nandor Zichy, he took off from Budapest on August the 21st in a de Havilland Gypsy Moth biplane, only to crash 4 days later in a storm near Aleppo, Syria. While both men were unhurt, their aircraft was completely destroyed. By this time, Almásy had become obsessed with finding Zerzura, or Oasis of Little Birds, a legendary city deep in the desert mentioned in various Arabic writings, including the now lost 15th century manuscript Kitab al-Kunuz, or Book of Treasures, and 1001 Nights, the famous collection of Middle Eastern folk tales. According to legend, the city, whose walls were as white as a dove, was home to mountains of treasure and a sleeping king and queen guarded by an army of giant black soldiers. To find the oasis, in 1932, Almásy teamed up with a trio of British explorers, Squadron leader Hubert Jones Penderell, Patrick Clayton, and Sir Robert Clayton, no relation to each other. While Almásy and Patrick Clayton drove to Kufra Oasis in 2-stair cars, Sir Robert Clayton and Squadron leader Penderell scouted the terrain ahead in a de Havilland Gypsy Moth biplane dubbed Rupert. While flying over the Gilf Kabir, a giant sandstone plateau straddling Egypt and Libya, the pair spotted a valley filled with green vegetation, which they presumed to be one of the 3 hidden valleys of Zerzura. However, the rough terrain around the plateau prevented the explorers from reaching the entrance of the valley by car, and they returned to Egypt empty-handed. Robert Clayton and his wife Dorothy inspired the fictional characters of Geoffrey and Catherine Clifton in The English Patient. In the book, Almásy embarks on a romantic affair with Catherine Clifton, much to her husband's anguish. In a jealous rage, Geoffrey Clifton crashes the expedition's airplane into Almásy, with Catherine aboard in an attempted murder-suicide. However, Almásy survives while Catherine is mortally wounded. In reality, there was no such love triangle, nor was there likely to have been one, for the historical record points overwhelmingly to László Almásy having been gay. According to researcher Heinrich Barth of the Institute for African Studies in Cologne in Germany, Egyptian princes were among Almásy's lovers. The Institute also claims to hold intimate correspondence from the Second World War between Almásy and a young German officer named Hans Eintholt, who fought with the Afrika Korps in North Africa. According to the letters, Almásy attempted to use his social and political connections to prevent Eintholt from being transferred to the Russian front. Tragically, however, Eintholt was killed in 1943 after stepping on a landmine during the German retreat through Tunisia. The real Robert Clifton did not die in a plane crash, but rather succumbed to spine or poliomyelitis shortly after the expedition's return to Cairo. However, his wife Dorothy, a skilled pilot in her own right, died on September the 15th, 1933, after mysteriously falling from her aircraft's cockpit at Brooklands Aerodrome in England. With the expedition's main benefactor gone, Almásy was forced to find another sponsor. He found one in Prince Kamal el-Din Hussein, the son of Sultan Hussein Kamal of Egypt, who had formally renounced his claim to the throne in 1917. An avid desert explorer himself, Prince Kamal led 2 expeditions into the Libyan desert in 1925 and 1926, even naming the Gilf Kabir, Arabic for Great Barrier, which at the time had no local name. Kamal died in August 1932, but not before funding another expedition, which returned to Gilf Kabir in the spring of 1933. This time, Almásy, along with squadron leader Penderell, Austrian writer Richard Herman, and German photographer Hans Kasperius, succeeded in entering the Wadi Tal, the 3rd valley previously spotted from the air, while a separate expedition led by Patrick Clayton reached the other 2 valleys, Wadi Hamran and Wadi Abd al-Malik. But while oral history obtained from an elder of the Tibu people at Kufra Oasis indicated that these valleys constituted the legendary Zerzura, the expedition was unable to definitively confirm this. However, they succeeded in making a far more important discovery in the form of rock paintings dating to the Neolithic period. In August of that year, Almásy returned once again to the Gilf Kabir, where, along with German ethnographer Leo Frobenius, his assistant Hans Rotert, and draftswoman Elizabeth Pauli, made perhaps his most famous discovery: a cavern in Wadi Sora known as the Cave of Swimmers, whose walls depict figures lying horizontally with bent limbs as if swimming, as well as animals such as giraffes and hippopotamuses. The drawings date back to 10,000 years ago, during the so-called African humid period, when the Sahara was much wetter and lusher than it is today. In the spring of 1934, Almásy led an expedition, organized by the Royal Egyptian Automobile Club, to the Gilf Kabir, Jebel Uweinat, and Jebel Kisu, during which he discovered and sketched more prehistoric rock art and erected a memorial tablet to Prince Kamal, who had died the previous year at the age of 57. The following February, Almásy and German explorer Hans Joachim von der Esch drove into Nubia in southern southern Egypt, where they became the first Europeans to re-establish contact with the Maghreb tribe, thought to be descendants of Nubian women and Hungarian soldiers serving in the Ottoman army in the 16th century. Then, in April of that year, Almásy and von der Esch explored the Great Sand Sea, from Ain Dalar to Siwa Oasis, one of the last major uncharted regions of the Libyan desert. Based on his experiences, Almásy published a book in Hungarian titled The Unknown Sahara by Airplane and Automobile in the Libyan Desert, later translated into German in 1939. Throughout the 1930s, Almásy explored over 2 million square kilometers of previously uncharted territory, leading the Bedouin to dub him Abu Ramla, Father of the Sand. While the English Patient depicts Almásy's last desert expedition and the fictional Geoffrey Clinton's bungled murder-suicide attempt as taking place in 1939, in reality Almásy's exploration career ended far earlier. The British authorities in Egypt had long suspected Almásy of spying for Italy and vice versa, and starting in 1935 refused him permission to make any more expeditions into the desert. This scuttled Almásy's ambition to locate the legendary lost army of the Persian king Cambyses II, a force of 50,000 soldiers, which according to ancient Greek historian Herodotus marched into Egypt in 524 BC, only to be swallowed up by the desert sands. Almásy's obsession with Herodotus is captured in Ondaite's novel, with his fictional counterpart carrying around a copy of the histories with his own annotations pasted in. Barred from the desert, Almásy became a representative for German automaker Porsche, selling luxury automobiles to Egyptian aristocrats, and turned to his other great passion, aviation, serving as a flight instructor and gliding pioneer for the Royal Egyptian Aviation Club. But following the outbreak of the Second World War, the British and Italian authorities in the region forced Almásy to return to Hungary. By now a world-renowned expert in desert navigation, in 1940 Almásy was approached by Major Nicholas Ritter of the Abwehr, the German military intelligence service. The Hungarian government, which joined the Axis powers in November of that year, allowed Almásy to join the German Luftwaffe, or Air Force, which granted him the rank of Hauptmann, or captain. Initially, Almásy was posted to Berlin, where he used his knowledge of the North African desert to prepare maps for Abteilung 4 Milgeo, the German army's geographic department. However, he was soon deployed to Libya as part of an Abwehr commando unit attached to Lehr Regiment Brandenburg ZBV 800, serving as second-in-command to Major Ritter. This unit, in turn, served the Africa Corps under General Erwin Rommel, the legendary Desert Fox. In The English Patient, the fictional Almásy places the wounded Catherine Clifton in the Cave of Swimmers, then sets out into the desert to find help. He manages to reach the town of El Taj in the Kufra Oasis, but is captured by the British and detained as a spy. He later escapes and offers work to the Germans as a means of returning to the Gilf Kabir. But when he finally reaches the Cave of Swimmers in 1942, he finds that Catherine has long since died. He carries her body to a nearby supply cache, which contains a biplane hidden under a sand-covered tarpaulin, and attempts to fly back to Cairo. However, the aircraft begins to leak oil and catches fire, forcing Almásy to bail out. Horrifically burned, he lands on the desert floor, where he is discovered and saved by a Bedouin tribe. In reality, Almásy's motivations for collaborating with the Germans are unclear. While Almásy later praised the Africa Corps for their fighting prowess and General Rommel for his humanity in conducting the desert campaign, there is little evidence that he was sympathetic to Nazi ideology. Indeed, in 1944, he helped save many Hungarian Jews from mass deportation to Nazi death camps. In the words of Gene Allington, a British intelligence analyst who followed Almásy's wartime exploits, quote, "If he was on any side at all, I think he was entirely a Hungarian." Whatever his political motivations, Almásy's first mission under Ritter was Operation El-Masri, an attempt to extract Egyptian General Aziz Ali El-Masri from Cairo so that he could lead an Arab revolt against the British authorities. Aziz, who had participated in the First World War Arab revolt under T.E. Lawrence, aka Lawrence of Arabia, was a staunch Arab nationalist whom the British had ousted as Army Chief of Staff after discovering he was collaborating with the Italian authorities in Libya. On May 16, 1941, Almásy flew to Egypt to meet with El-Masri, but El-Masri never made the rendezvous. His aircraft developed engine trouble and crash-landed 16 kilometers outside of Cairo. 1 month later, the Abwehr tried again, this time sending Major Ritter to make the rendezvous. However, rough terrain and poor visibility prevented Ritter's pilot from landing at the designated meeting spot in the desert, and nearby fighting forced his aircraft to ditch in the Mediterranean. The survivors spent 9 hours floating in a life raft before finally washing up on shore and being rescued. With Ritter wounded and recuperating in hospital, Almásy, his second-in-command, took over the unit. By this time, the British had uncovered the German plot and arrested Almásy, forcing the Abwehr to change tactics. In 1942, they launched one of the most audacious intelligence missions of the war, Operation Salam, an attempt to smuggle 2 two German agents, Johannes Epler and Hans Stanstetter, into Cairo by driving from Jalo Oasis in Libya to Asyut in Egypt via a route south of Siwa Oasis, a distance of some 3,200 kilometers across treacherous desert terrain. As an expert in desert navigation, László Almásy was placed in command of the operation. To make the epic crossing, Almásy chose two captured Canadian-made Chevrolet CMP trucks, the favourite vehicle of the British Long-Range Desert Group, or LRDG. Ironically, the founder of the LRDG, Brigadier Ralph Bagnold, had been a colleague of Almásy's during his desert exploration days. To ensure they would not be shot as spies if captured, the expedition members all wore German army uniforms, while German crosses were subtly incorporated into the vehicle's camouflage. Planning for the expedition took several months, and due to the shifting situation at the front, its departure was postponed several times. Finally, on April 29, 1942, Almásy, Epler, and Stanstetter, the latter two codenamed Max and Moritz after the German storybook characters, left Tripoli and drove south towards Jalo, setting off into the deep desert on May 12th. While contemporary Italian maps indicated a landscape of Syria, flat, hard ground covered in gravel, the expedition soon encountered a vast, impassable region of soft sand dunes. After several members of the expedition fell ill with dysentery and one of the vehicles had to be abandoned due to a broken axle, the group was forced to return to Jalo and scout a new route by air. This time, Almásy decided to head straight south, then easy across the Gulf Kabir, with which he was intimately familiar through his previous expeditions. However, this brought the expedition dangerously close to the British-controlled and heavily garrisoned Kufra Oasis. Nonetheless, Almásy daringly ventured into the oasis to sabotage the enemy's fuel tanks before proceeding east. After 2 weeks of grueling driving across treacherous quicksand and baking salt flats, the expedition successfully crossed the Gulf Kabir and the Karga Oasis, finally reaching Asyut on May 23rd. Here, Epler and Stanstetter embarked with their radio transmitters, while Almásy headed back towards Jalo. Incredibly, the journey of Operation Salam across the Libyan desert was actively tracked by British intelligence, who intercepted and decoded Sandstetter's radio transmissions back to German Army headquarters. But while analyst Gene Allington at the government's Code and Cipher School at Bletchley Park, Buckinghamshire, tried to warn British forces that enemy agents were operating behind their lines, an imminent large-scale offensive by Roman in Libya resulted in top priority being given to radio transmissions from the Africa Corps. As a result, by the time a search for Operation Salam was organised, Almásy was already safely back in Jalo. In recognition of the Hungarians' contributions, General Rommel awarded Almásy the Iron Cross First Class and promoted him to the rank of Major. Meanwhile, the second phase of Operation Salam was underway under the codename Condor. After being dropped off by Almásy, Epler and Stanstetter buried their army uniforms and one of their radio sets and walked into Asyut, where they caught a train to Cairo. Epler, who had been raised in Alexandria and spoke perfect Arabic, adopted the alias of Hussein Ghaffar, while Stanstetter, who had worked in the US petroleum industry before the war, posed as an American businessman, Peter Muncaster. Together, they infiltrated various popular social establishments like Café Gropi and the Kit Kat Club, where they gradually pieced together a local network of informants, including pimps, gangsters, and entertainers, including belly dancer Hekmet Fahmy, an old friend of Epler's. In order to transmit intelligence securely, Epler and Stanstetter used a so-called book code based on the 1938 Daphne du Maurier novel Rebecca. Their mission would eventually inspire another popular work of fiction, Ken Follett's 1980 spy novel The Key to Rebecca. However, when Epler and Stanstetter tried to contact their handlers back in Libya, they received no reply. Suspecting that their apartment was unsuitably placed for wireless reception, the pair moved to a dahabeah, or houseboat on the Nile. Here, Stanstetter, a skilled carpenter, constructed an ingenious radio cabinet concealed inside a gramophone, but once again, the pair failed to make contact with headquarters. Little did the agents know that the Abwehr radio operators assigned to their mission, Oberfreiter Waldemar Weber and Feldwebel Walter Aberl, had been captured when General Rommel's headquarters near Bir Hakeim was overrun by British forces on May the 29th. After only 2 months in Cairo, the agents' situation had become desperate. Having freely spent their limited funds, the pair were running out of money and failed to gather or report any useful intelligence. They thus made contact with Victor Haar, a German national working at the Swedish embassy, hoping to acquire a working radio and send out a request for more money, or preferably an extraction from Cairo. Haar provided a radio, which he discovered in the basement of the embassy, and introduced Epler and Stanstetter to two nationalist Egyptian officers, Hassan Ezzat and Anwar el-Sadat, the latter of whom served as president of Egypt from 1970 until his assassination in 1981. But Epler and Sandstetter's situation was not all all that it seemed. In his book Revolt in the Desert, Sadat recalled that when he attempted to repair the Germans' radio, he quickly discovered that the agents had deliberately sabotaged the machine in order to shack up and enjoy themselves with a pair of Jewish prostitutes. In order to avoid later reprisals, they kept a fake diary of intelligence they had supposedly collected during their stay in Cairo. Despite this, Sadat and Hassan agreed to contact General Rommel's headquarters and on July the 23rd, 1942, transmitted the following message, quoting, "To Section 1H west of the Abwehr Angelo, please guarantee our existence. We are in mortal danger, or it is exceedingly urgent according to Sandstetter. Please use the wavelength number 1 at 900 hours Tripoli time. Max and Moritz." End quote. But Epler and Sandstetter's luck was about to run out, for unbeknownst to them, their contact at the Swedish embassy, Victor Ha, was actually a double agent working for the British. On July the 11th, he informed a British agent in Cairo that he had been contacted by a pair of German spies. 2 weeks later, Ha was secretly picked up by British intelligence and placed in protective custody in Palestine. Thanks to Ha's tip-off, the agent's extravagant lifestyles, and the fact that most of the British banknotes they were supplied with were obvious forgeries, on July the 24th, only 6 weeks following their arrival in Cairo, Epler and Sandstetter were arrested aboard their houseboat. Sandstetter tried to flood the boat and attempt suicide by slashing his wrists, but eventually he and Epler chose to cooperate fully with British intelligence, a decision which ultimately saved them from the death penalty. The spies' cooperation was motivated largely by self-preservation, Epler later stating, "I'm not so keen on dying, I have told everything," but also by bitterness towards their superiors. As Epler told Sandstetter when they were finally reunited, "Those bastards Almásy and the others, all of them have received the Iron Cross First Class. To hell with them. My dear old Sandy, if they do not hang me, if I ever meet Almásy again, God how I shall beat him up." End quote. Their surprisingly humane treatment by the British may have also factored into their decision, with Sandstetter later stating, "In comparison with the rotten stuff they serve up in the Afrika Korps, they have marvellous food here." Based on Epler and Sandstetter's confession, the rest of their network was soon rounded up, including the officers Hassan Ezzat and Anwar el-Sadat and the belly dancer Hekmet Fahmy. But although the British discovered an annotated copy of Mein Kampf and a diary filled with military intelligence in Sadat's apartment, neither he nor Ezzat were executed, instead being discharged from the army and imprisoned for the duration of the war. Hekmet Fahmy initially received a suspended sentence, but under further interrogation eventually confessed providing vital intelligence to Epler and Sandstetter, writing to Egyptian Prime Minister Mustafa al-Nanas Pasha that, quote, "It may be well known to your excellency that the Germans are cold-blooded, rude barbarians. They would march over their own corpses. You have a German spy before you, and I leave it to your excellency to believe him or not." As a result, Fahmy was sentenced to 2 years in prison. In the end, Operation Condor proved a complete failure, with Epler and Sandstetter failing to provide any useful intelligence to Rommel before being captured. The war in North Africa raged on for another year, with the German-Italian army finally surrendering in Tunisia on May 13th, 1943. Soon after completing his epic drive across Libya and Egypt, László Almásy was struck down with an acute case of amoebic dysentery and was sent to Nazi-occupied Athens to recuperate. The following year, he returned to Budapest, where he completed his memoir about the North African campaign with Rommel in Libya. As previously mentioned, in 1944, Almásy risked his life to save several Jewish families from being deported to Nazi death camps. These included the family of his neighbor Lajos Weiss and of Olympic fencer Jeno Fuchs. He also saved a Polish Jewish refugee boy by obtaining false papers and placing him in a Catholic orphanage where he survived the war. After the end of the war, Almásy briefly served as a translator for the occupying Soviet Red Army, but was soon arrested and tried for alleged war crimes and joining the armed forces of a foreign power. These charges were largely based on Almásy's 1943 book, but when it emerged that neither the state prosecutor or judge had actually read the book, which the Soviets had already banned, Almásy was acquitted. However, the NKVD, the Soviet secret police, continued to dig into Almásy's wartime activities, and he was rearrested 2 months later. But with the help of some influential friends, including Alaeddin Mukhtar, cousin of Egyptian King Farouk, Almásy managed to bribe some communist officials and flee into British-occupied Austria under a false identity. It is rumored that his escape was assisted by British intelligence, to whom he transmitted intelligence about Soviet troop movements, but this has never been confirmed. From here, he travelled to Rome and then to Egypt, where he resumed his old occupations of flight instructor and safari guide. Then in December 1950, King Farouk appointed Almásy director of the newly founded Egyptian Desert Research Institute. But this triumph was to prove short-lived. In The English Patient, the badly burned fiction Almásy dies peacefully of a morphine overdose administered by his nurse Hannah. But the real-life Almásy's demise was far less dignified. During a trip to Mozambique, he once again contracted amoebic dysentery, the primary symptom of which is copious and uncontrollable diarrhea. He was admitted to a hospital in Salzburg, Austria, where he eventually died on March 22, 1951, at the age of 61. He was buried on the grounds of the hospital, his gravesite being forgotten until 1995, when a group of Hungarian aviation and desert exploration enthusiasts erected a gravestone bearing the epitaph "Pilot, Sahara Explorer, and Discoverer of Zerzura." Thus ended the epic and adventurous saga of Count László Almásy, the real-life English patient. A far cry from the handsome romantic hero of Michael Ondaatje's novel, Almásy was a complicated and contradictory figure whose legacy remains controversial to this day. But while there is little doubt that he assisted the Nazis during the Second World War, he also actively opposed their genocidal designs, while his 1930s expeditions contributed significantly to our understanding of the geography and history of the Sahara Desert. It just goes to show that truth is often stranger and more interesting than fiction.